Without getting too far into the weeds, legally speaking, you had constitutionally protected rights if you're accused of a crime. You only had statutory rights that if you were a victim of a crime. Well, now those have been elevated to a constitutional amendment, so they're now equal. So the system should not be tilted one way or the other. It should be absolutely balanced, as the statue of Lady Justice would show us, right? So the scales of justice should be balanced now, and the prosecutor's responsibility and the court's responsibilities to the victims of crime are enumerated now, not only in the Constitution, but also in the statutes of the state of Ohio, okay? I'm gonna run down through them not very quickly, but quickly enough to where you guys understand them, and how it affects us, not only in Reynoldsburg, but across the state of Ohio. In our mayor's court, we have a very, very fast-paced mayor's court. We are like a small municipal court right now. We do over 100 cases per week. Our police department keeps us very busy, and we're very appreciative of that. So our large numbers do continue. But as far as the Marsy's law, the first thing it does, and some of these are so common sense, you would almost be astounded that you don't understand that they've already been taken care of. The first one is the right for the victim to be informed, okay? I, as the prosecutor or the court system, has to inform a victim of crime that their case is proceeding through the system. Now that seems very simple, and it's not very cumbersome, especially when someone commits crime, police officers arrest criminal, then they go to the court proceedings, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes an officer can't find an accused of a crime, so we issue a bench warrant for that person, and sometime later in the future, we come upon that person, we serve the warrant, we put them through the process, and it's not fresh, it's not a fresh arrest right after the crime has been committed. So we have a responsibility now to the victims to make sure that they're aware that their court case is now proceeding, even though it may not be right after the conduct that gave rise to the charges occurred. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? So now we have to seek them out, and we have to make sure they're at least informed. They have the right to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. Once again, not turning the system on its ear. This is something that seems to be rational, right, and a reasonable request. But now we protect their privacy. We don't have to disclose their location. We don't have to disclose their phone number. They don't have to participate in pre-trial interviews by the defense or defense witnesses. Things like that, like I said, get more into the weeds of the system, but fairness, dignity, respect, right? It's not something that seems to be illogical in the system. We don't want to re-victimize our victims when they go through the criminal justice process. We're very aware of that now, and we're very aware that the stigma that occurs if you drag these things out and they feel like they're not being heard, they feel like they're not being either listened to, or they're not participating, or they're not being informed. So we tried to address all those concerns with the Marsy's law. This is another one, once again, that seems to be very logical, but wasn't always happening. The right to full and fair restitution. Now, restitution is not compensatory damages. Normie or some other lawyer in the room can tell you what those means. But basically, restitution is to make the victim of crime whole. So whatever, if they had to seek medical treatment, if they lost time off of work, if their property was damaged, we're not talking about compensating them for those injuries, those pain and suffering type things and stuff like that. We're talking about what they're really out of pocket because of the crime that occurred and the intervention that occurred in their lives. So, and this is a significant change. What it did was it took from a discretionary standard with the court to a mandatory standard. If I have a victim of crime who fills out the proper paperwork and instructs me to seek restitution, I present that to the court, and the court must, by a clear and convincing evidence standard, they must order that restitution. They can't just say, sue them, insurance will take care of it, some way, victim of crime compensation fund with the Attorney General's office. All of that is not discretionary any longer. It's now mandatory. The court must take that up, and if I prove it by a lower threshold of evidence, then they have to order that restitution. And they're entitled to it in a timely fashion. So we're not talking about paying $5 for a week for eternity, okay? It's also monitored through the probation department. So they make sure those payments come not only timely, but appropriately, so it's not going to be dragging on forever. The last thing, which is probably the most important thing, and this is really how Marsy's Law popped up. If you don't know the origins of Marsy's Law, you can look on the website, you can Google it. It's a very, very sad story, but the very short version is that Marsy's attacker was released from prison without her being notified. and he bumped into her in a grocery store in the town that they still lived in after he was released from prison, and he ultimately killed her. She was a victim of homicide. Marsy's brother was a very, very successful doctor, a medical doctor, who took up the cause after his sister was murdered, and basically has spread this law across the land. And I think we were 32nd maybe, so it's moving across the country, and soon to be, it's a very popular initiative, and it soon will be the law of the land in all 50 states. We're very confident of. But this one, going back to the right, it requires either the prison system, the jail system, or the court system to make a victim aware of the release of their perpetrator. So the person's convicted, they're incarcerated. Before they're released from their incarceration, the jail, the court, the prosecutor, somebody must inform the victim that they're going to be released. Not that they have a right to say, no, don't release that person. If they're entitled to parole or the expiration of their sentence, we notify the victim now that they're going to be back on the street, so they're not surprised or something. They can take appropriate steps. So that's Marsy's Law in a nutshell. Like I said, if you're more interested in it or want to talk about it more, I'm certainly willing to talk to you after the meeting. But I was the co-sponsor and the co-chair of the Licking County Initiative when we passed this thing. There were members of the Bar Association that are very apprehensive about this. I never am in favor of modifying our Constitution because of how difficult it is to do. You may have unintended consequences that can only be taken care of by another ballot initiative, and it takes a lot of time, money, and expertise to get that done. So I'm normally not in favor of modifying the Constitution in any manner. But ever since we dipped our toe into the casino statewide, if we're going to do it for that, why aren't we doing it for victims of crimes where I kind of fell on that? So, and I wasn't in favor of the casino thing, by the way, if you didn't get that from my comment. But my thought was, if we're going to do it for that, why not for victims of crime, right? So I tried to convince as many of my colleagues as I could in the bar who was apprehensive and thought that this was going to be some kind of radical and dramatic shift, that it was not going to be. And so far we've seen over a year, it's really not. They are common sense initiatives, but now the playing field is supposed to be even.